Saudi Arabia. Since the rise of Mohammed bin Salman as the de facto leader, the country has embarked on a senseless kind of adventurism across the region. The young prince's aggressive performance in the theater of politics has almost backfired, exposing the kingdom to retaliatory responses from other regional actors. The result has been embarrassing for a country that considered itself as the leader of the Arab world, hence apparently the main supporter of the Palestinian nation. In order to protect its own soil against its newly unnecessarily made enemies, the Saudis are now seeking to purchase missile systems from Palestine's #1 enemy, namely the Israeli regime. As one of the major importers of arms, and at the same time as a country with one of the weakest armies in the world, Saudi Arabia is now keen on having Israel's Iron Dome. According to Breaking Defense, Riyadh is considering Israeli-made missile systems seriously as never before. The timing is of course of considerable significance, as the Saudis have sought to procure the Iron Dome for a few years, but this time their interest has reached a very practical phase. This level of military interaction cannot happen overnight. That's why Saudi Arabia and the Israeli regime don't have formal relations with each other. In the Muslim world, the Saudis are accused of having intelligence cooperation, at least for some years, with the Israelis, and the Iron Dome purchase might act as corroborative evidence.
Now, according to sources, the Saudi interest in the Israeli Iron Dome has reached a practical phase, and this in many ways can be seen as representative of the overall alliance between the two regimes, which hasn't been made public yet, but apparently there have been talks between the two regimes for years, including on this so-called security and defense issue, as they call it. So it doesn't really come as a surprise, given that there has been an increasing diplomatic as well as a military, at least from an ideological point of view, harmonization between the two regimes.
In the absence of American THAAD and Patriot batteries, which recently were removed from Prince Sultan Amir Base, the Saudis are scrambling to find new missile systems. But experts believe the situation is much more complicated, with the odds heavily against the kingdom.
The United States has just in recent weeks removed its most advanced missile defense structure system from Saudi Arabia, and of course we should also see this within the context of the US withdrawal from Afghanistan, which may have caused some nervous reactions among the US allies in the Gulf, including Saudi Arabia and its close allies there. And then of course at the same time there have been continuous responses from Yemen against Saudi Arabia in retaliation for its attacks on Yemen. So the Saudi regime is confronted with challenges, but trying to keep its quite powerful position through new configurations.
In recent months, Ansarullah has dealt great blows to the Saudi-led coalition forces. After years of bombing and targeting Yemeni civilians and infrastructure, the Saudis have found themselves vulnerable against Yemen's homemade drones. And disappointed by what the kingdom is in possession of, Saudi Arabia is going to try its luck this time with Israeli missile systems. Those systems already tested and of course failed against retaliatory attacks from Gaza. In other words, like the American Patriot missile systems, the Israeli Iron Dome system's combat performance has grossly been exaggerated. Meanwhile, Tel Aviv has always asserted that it would help the enemies of Iran, particularly in terms of intelligence and military equipment. helping the Saudis against Yemen's Ansarullah, who have launched successful retaliatory attacks against Saudi targets, and trying to back the kingdom up in the face of the Islamic Republic of Iran is just one side of the coin. The other side is without doubt marketing and milking a rich customer such as Saudi Arabia. And the embarrassing point is Riyadh's plan to obtain equipment from a regime it is supposed to be at loggerheads with.
The Israeli regime has, of course, been marketing its military equipment and technologies, including surveillance technologies internationally, that it has tested on Palestinians for many years. That includes different mechanisms for the perpetuation of state violence that are presented as defense and security. And it has provided oppressive regimes all over the world with different sorts of methods to facilitate human rights violations, surveillance, and the control and containment of different populations, in particular minority populations. So the Saudi regime would be just one of many oppressive regimes that is actually buying technology from the Israeli regime for so-called security and defense purposes.
News of the procurement of the Iron Dome comes a few years after denials by both Riyadh and Tel Aviv. According to the Israeli news outlet Haaretz, the Saudis, as well as its allies, including the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, sought to buy the Iron Dome for the second time in September 2019. Now the procurement is by and large being interpreted as a prelude to the normalization, or as some critics put it, the publicization of relations between the two sides.
So these latest developments could definitely be another prelude to the normalization or to the publicization of the relations between the Saudi and the Israeli regime. So there has been a normalization, so-called, to some extent, and it needs to be seen when and how an official publicization would take place. But Saudi has, of course, backed the normalization between the Zionist entity and the dictatorships in Bahrain and UAE that took place in 2020. And the Saudi and Israeli regimes have been collaborating and doing that more and more openly in recent years, and have on numerous occasions actually expressed their solidarity with one another.
Yoel Gozansky from Tel Aviv University's Institute for National Security Studies, INSS, has recently pointed out Israel would do the right thing by offering the Saudi kingdom assistance in defending its strategic facilities against the growing threat from Iran. All in all, this is not a surprising development going on between the Saudi kingdom and the Israeli regime. The ugly alliance between the two sides has been built upon confronting popular demands, including freedom and democracy, across the region, and in particular in both Saudi Arabia and the occupied territories.
Of course, Israel is a very useful ally here, and not to forget, of course, that these regimes, Saudi, Israel, and other U.S. proxies, have their existence as oppressive regimes which are embedded in Western framework, guaranteed to a large extent on their transactional relation with the United States. So obviously they would, to that extent, collaborate amongst each other.
As two destabilizing forces in the region, the chemistry between the two sides is to some extent based on the oppression-destruction strategy and a need for constant militarization as a result of that. The Saudis have been attacking their neighboring Muslim country for the past few years, the first heinous sin, and then asking for help from another Muslim nation's enemy, the second unforgivable sin, while calling itself the leader of the Muslim world. The anti-Iranian rhetoric provides the two sides with a pretext to justify their alliance, what was hard to even imagine a decade ago.